Hey everyone. Today I'm happy to share with you my attempted recreation of RC-20 that I made using Snap Heap. It's not a perfect recreation of RC-20, but it was kind of a fun sound design project where I attempted to remake all of the functions and all of the modules of RC-20, and I got a decent product out of it. This will be available for free download in the description, and it's going to require the $30 paid version of Snap Heap. But if you're interested in sound design and you love kind of tinkering and messing with modular effects, Snap Heap's probably worth the $30. And I think regularly RC-20 costs something like $100. So let's get into some testing and comparing the two, and I'll go into detail about kind of how I made my own version of it and how you can change a lot of the settings in the version that I made to go a little beyond what RC-20 can do. Let's quickly go through some listening examples where I attempted to recreate some of the presets that RC-20 has. So here we have Vinyl 1. I did some modifications to these presets, but nothing drastic. Next we have this dreamy synth pad. To get these a little bit closer, you could try increasing the rate here on the Wow LFO. As you can hear, you can definitely get pretty similar effects with my recreated version. Let's move on to an acoustic piano where I grabbed this Cassette Bad Batteries preset and tried to recreate the sound as closely as I could with my version. For the next comparison here, we have a boom bap drum pattern that I made using XLNXO. Here's what that sounds like. Hey, Future Me here. Since I recorded that original video, Snap Heap has had a bunch of updates, and I did a bit of tweaking to my presets to try to make them better, as well as the overall design of MC-20. The first most important thing I did was turn on compensation for the pitch shifter. Although it does kind of change the tone of the pitch shifter, it now will compensate for latency, so you won't hear a slightly delayed version on playback once it's processed by MC-20. You can hear the latencies being compensated. If you turn this compensation off, you're going to hear it's now delayed. So that should fix the latency issues. A couple things you might want to tweak to get a better sound out of this. The first thing here would be ring mod, which I'm using to add noise to the source. The noise can be a bit aggressive. You can turn down the mix here if you'd like, but another thing you can do is you can try messing with this frequency knob here, which is the cutoff for the noise being generated. You can hear now the noise is focused more in the low frequency, so that could be ideal for you. If you open it all the way up, you get a much brighter noise. You can also try messing with rectify. You can hear that change the noise pretty substantially. Next thing here that's really cool is this distortion module. They recently added shaper, and the only thing I have linked here is distort to drive amount. What you can do is you could turn this off and add in the new shaper module here, and you can create your own type of distortion. Another thing I'd recommend tweaking just to get a cool sound is turning up this spread control here on your distortion module. That's it for my updates. Now back to the main video. Pretty substantial differences in certain modules where I was unable to recreate the character, or I guess in this case with something like the noise module, they're using an actual audio sample, and you can't use audio samples in here. So to recreate the noise module, I used a combination of this ring mod module and the Bitcrush module, which when you turn the bits down, it just adds noise. Here is what noise sounds like. You can see two things getting worked on here. You can see some fluttering here in the bits value of the Bitcrush module, and you can see the mix increasing for ring mod. They offer two kind of different styles of noise. The ring mod mix adds a noise that seems to almost follow an envelope, or at least follow the source, so it's not a sustained continuous noise source like you can do with RC-20, but the Bitcrush bit reduction is a sustained noise source, and you can combine the two for a kind of unique effect. Here's that source with none of the Bitcrush bit effect. You can hear it's not just adding noise, it's definitely changing the character of the original source, and that's why I didn't go too aggressive with this, but it is a unique effect, and it adds definitely a retro sound to it, which I like. And here's what the bit reduction sounds like without any of the ring modulation. Much different effect there, and it's really cool when you combine them because you get a pretty interesting effect out of it. Okay, let's move on to tape Wow and Flutter. I had to make two separate macro knobs for these to match the Wow and Flutter slider you have here in RC-20. To recreate the Wobble module, which is basically tape Wow and Flutter, I've used these random LFOs here to modulate a pitch shifter, which is going to slightly detune the source coming into it at different rates. Of course, Flutter is going to be quicker, as you can see here on this graph, and Wow is going to be slower. Here's what that sounds like. By default, it's pretty subtle. What you can do if you want to add more Wow and Flutter, things can get out of control pretty quickly, but what you can do is you can drag these sliders here to extend the range that the pitch is going to modulate. So this one's for Wow and this one's for Flutter. You can go really drastic. I'm never using them to that degree. And you can change other settings as well. You can change the rate at which they're modulating, or in this case, I guess kind of fluttering and moving all over the place. If you think that's too slow for tape flutter, you can just grab this rate function right here and drag it up. It's definitely not as intuitive as RC-20 and how they've implemented it in that plugin, but it was my best attempt at recreating what that module does. On to Distort. For Distort on RC-20, there are multiple options here: crunch, heavy, zap, air, tube pair. You have a little bit of flexibility here in Snap Heap where you can change the style of distortion from overdrive to saturate, fold back, sine, avoid quantize. It will bust your ears with most settings, but it was kind of hard to make it sound as clean, and it's not implemented as well as RC-20, but it still works, and you can definitely mess with a couple more settings here to get a particular type of distortion tailored to your audio source. Goes down. All right, distortion. This effect is pretty straightforward, definitely not as flexible as RC-20, but you can get a little variety of sounds out of that. Moving on to the digital module, which is basically sample rate reduction and bit crushing. This was a very difficult one to implement and to make it sound even close to what RC-20 can do. This is a very special effect, in my opinion, and it sounds very unique compared to a lot of other plugins. I couldn't really get it to sound great, but it sounds decent on lower settings here, as I'll demonstrate. So about 0 to 30% is the usable range of this, in my opinion. And you could change some of these macros and how much they're affecting it. So you could make this whole knob go from 0 to 30. It definitely bit crushes it. It just doesn't sound as smooth and sound as clean as it does on RC-20. You can make the effect a little more subtle, and you can remove some of the harshness of the bit crushing artifacts by turning this DAC Q knob all the way up. But it also removes a lot of character from the bit crushing. As you can see, I have this gain module below some of the effects, and this is to basically just turn down the audio based on how the module above it is changing the volume of the signal. Moving on to the space reverb module, this isn't too much different from RC-20, and I think it's pretty easy to replicate a lot of what RC-20 is doing. You actually get a little bit more control with Snap Heap in terms of the different things that you can change on the reverb. Pretty straightforward there. Moving on to magnetic, this was a very difficult one to try to figure out exactly how to recreate what RC-20 does. You have wear and flutter. I think what most people use this for is the dropouts and kind of a little bit more of that tape effect. And I couldn't get anything really close to that, but what I tried to use, which seemed to create a cool effect similar to the stereo option in the Wobble module, and I guess a little bit of the wear and flutter you get for magnetic, is I used this ensemble here. So here's what that sounds like. It definitely adds some nice variation to the imaging of the audio source, but it can get a little out of control when you start adding more voices or you detune it significantly. There's a lot of flexibility to all of these modules, and you have a lot more control over exactly what the effect is doing compared to RC-20. Moving on to the tone section, which very simply I believe is a tilt EQ or a singular peaking band of an EQ. I typically stick with the shelf option, and that's what I attempted to recreate here. When tone is at 50%, it's at its default. So actually this entire time I think I had a little bit of that low end boost going on. When you turn it up, it removes some of the low end, adds some of the high end. When you turn it down to 0, it removes a lot of the high end and adds some low end. Moving on to the other little odds and ends with RC-20, you have a small little low-cut, high-cut section here with a couple different shelving options, and that was pretty simple to recreate in Snap Heap. If you want to get really fancy, you could grab one of these randoms and you could add it to the cutoff. Add a little bit of variation to your filtering. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with these LFOs down here and these envelopes and things like that that you can use to modulate a lot of the effects on these singular modules. You can add a stereo module, and then you can bring down the width to emulate the width knob you have here. I did my best to recreate what RC-20 is doing, but it's a pretty complex plugin, and to recreate it in a modular environment, even something as deep and detailed as Snap Heap, it's very challenging, but I thought I did a decent job of it. But what I did want to demonstrate is all of the crazy stuff you can do with Snap Heap that you can't do with RC-20. Basically, I created a bunch of multi-effects patches for Snap Heap that I might actually be selling in the future. I might make a pack of 50 and sell it for $5 or something like that. So if you're interested in a pack for Snap Heap, consider subscribing and keep an eye out for that. Here's a couple examples of very unique things that I was able to do with Snap Heap that I definitely would not be able to do with RC-20. I found Snap Heap very useful creating super complex modulated delay systems. As you could hear with that last one, it creates a very unique deep delay where the delay randomly becomes distorted, slightly mangled, and slightly flanged. If you're curious about what you were hearing in this video, I was using a bunch of various Cymatics MIDI chord progressions and melodies. A lot of people hate on MIDI chord progressions and things like that, and I understand the hate in a production sense, but from a sound design perspective, it's very valuable to have a bunch of unique melodies and chord progressions and things like that to just throw on a track to allow you to mess with the plugin that you're trying to create patches for. So I'd recommend that if you're interested in making some patches, check out some of the Cymatics MIDI packs. I'm not sponsored by them, nothing like that. I just find them very useful from a sound design perspective. I really hope you enjoyed taking a look at my attempted recreation of RC-20. I hope you found this useful, and maybe if you're interested in messing with Snap Heap, this could have had some useful information for you in terms of how you can mess with the plugin and create your own unique, complex effects. Check out the description for a link to a free download for it. You don't need any of the paid modules in Snap Heap, you just need the very basic $30 Snap Heap. Have fun messing with it, and if you have any recommendations for how I can improve my version of RC-20, please let me know, and I'll consider implementing it and updating the release. Also, if you create anything cool with it, feel free and share it with me. I'd love to hear it. Thanks a lot for watching, and have a good day.